My husband of 50 years, the man I was supposed to grow old and gray with, didn't just leave me for a woman half my age. He came back, a year later, penniless, pathetic, and begging for a second chance. And I, in an act of what he thought was forgiveness, took him back, as my maid. Hi everyone. My name is Eleanor, but most of you here know me as Grandma Eleanor. I'm 78 years old, and I'm speaking to you from the sunroom of my beautiful home, a home that has seen more drama in the last 2 years than it has in the previous 50. This is a story that most of my friends and family only know the first, ugly half of. They know my husband, Richard, left me in a spectacular, humiliating fashion. They all saw it happen. But only a very small handful of people know about the second act. They don't know that he came crawling back, and they certainly don't know the arrangement I have made for him. For a long time, I kept this second part of the story a secret, partly out of a lingering, foolish sense of protecting his dignity. But I've come to realize that my story isn't about his dignity. It's about mine. It's about reclaiming your own power in the face of the ultimate betrayal. Before I begin, I hope you'll do me a small kindness. The story I'm about to tell required me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. Your support helps to fuel that strength. So please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It means the world to me to know you're out there listening. Thank you. To understand the sweet, poetic justice of my husband scrubbing my floors, you have to understand the gilded cage he had built for me and for himself over 50 years. Our story, you see, was the local fairy tale. It all started when we were just children, really. Richard and I were high school sweethearts. We married at 20, fresh out of college, with stars in our eyes and not a penny to our names. He was ambitious, even then. He had this restless, burning energy, a desire to conquer the world. And I, a quiet girl who loved to paint, was completely captivated by his fire. I was the calm to his storm, the steady anchor to his soaring kite. Richard was brilliant with money. He started a small real estate business that, over the course of 5 decades, grew into an empire. We weren't just comfortable, we were wealthy. Very wealthy. We built this house, our dream house, a sprawling, beautiful estate with gardens and a swimming pool, and we filled it with 2 wonderful children, a son and a daughter, and what I thought was a lifetime of happy memories. Our life was a performance of perfection. We were the golden couple of our small, affluent town. Richard was the self-made tycoon, the pillar of the community. I was the elegant, supportive wife, the perfect hostess, the woman who ran our beautiful home with a quiet, graceful efficiency. We threw the most lavish parties. Our annual Christmas gala was the social event of the season. We were a team, a brand, the stunningly successful, enviably happy Collins family. And for 50 years, I truly believed our own press. I thought the performance was real. Richard, as he grew older, became obsessed with the one thing his money couldn't buy: you. It started subtly. The expensive, tailor-made suits. The new, flashy sports car every few years. Then came the personal enhancements. The hair dye that was just a little too dark for a man his age. The teeth whitening that was just a little too bright. He joined a high-end gym and hired a personal trainer, spending hours a day sculpting a body that was fighting a losing battle against time. I supported it all, of course. I told him he looked wonderful. I saw it as a harmless vanity, a man's version of a midlife crisis that had simply stretched into his golden years. I didn't see it for what it was, a desperate, panicked attempt to outrun his own mortality. He didn't want to grow old and gray with me. He didn't want to grow old at all. And then, Ashe appeared. Her name was Amber. She was his new personal trainer at the gym. She was 28 years old, a glorious, sun-kissed creature with a body that defied gravity and eyes the color of a tropical lagoon. She was everything I was not: young, firm, and full of a bright, uncomplicated, and ultimately predatory energy. The antagonist in my story wasn't a shadowy secret. She was a smiling, bubbly, blonde grenade that he rolled right into the middle of our lives. He started talking about her constantly. Amber says I should be eating more kale. Amber thinks I have the core strength of a 30-year-old. Amber, Amber, Amber. Her name was a constant, chirping presence in our home. I, in my naivete, in my 50 years of unshakable trust, saw nothing but a trainer and her client. I would see them at the country club, her laughing at his jokes, her hand lingering just a little too long on his arm. And I would tell myself I was being paranoid. I was a 76-year-old woman. Of course, a beautiful young thing like that found my husband charming. He wasn't charming. I was a fool. A happy, trusting, blind old fool. The betrayal, when it came, was not a quiet, private affair. Richard, a man who had curated our public image with the precision of a master artist, chose to demolish it in the most public, most humiliating way possible. He chose our 50th wedding anniversary party. It was a spectacular event, held right here, in this very house. 300 guests. A 10-piece band. Fountains of champagne. I was wearing a beautiful custom-made silver gown, feeling like the queen of my own fairy tale. We had just finished renewing our vows, our 2 wonderful children standing beside us as our witnesses. Richard had given a moving, eloquent speech about our half-century of love, of partnership, of shared dreams. He had looked into my eyes, and he had told me, and everyone we had ever known, that I was the love of his life. An hour later, as the party was in full swing, he tapped a champagne glass for another announcement. Everyone quieted, expecting another sentimental toast. I stood beside him, my arm linked through his, smiling, my heart so full of love it felt like it would burst. He looked out at the crowd, at our children, our grandchildren, our lifelong friends. And then he said the words that would bring my entire world crashing down. "As all of you know," he began, his voice strong and confident, "Eleanor and I have had a wonderful 50 years together. But life is about growth. It's about not being afraid to start a new chapter. And I've realized that my chapter with Eleanor is over." A stunned, confused silence fell over the crowd. I felt the smile freeze on my face. My arm, linked through his, suddenly felt cold as ice. "I have found a new partner to share the next chapter of my life with," he continued, his voice bright with a sickening, youthful excitement. "Someone who inspires me to be young, to be vibrant, to live life to the fullest. And I'd like to introduce her to you all now." And then he turned to the edge of the crowd. And walking towards us, through a sea of our shocked and horrified friends, was Amber. She was wearing a tight, backless fire engine red dress that was so inappropriate. It was an act of aggression in itself. She walked right up to the stage, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face, and she took my husband's hand. And he, my husband of 50 years, the father of my children, raised her hand in the air, like a prize fighter who had just won the championship bout, and he said, "Everyone, this is Amber, my future." The world didn't just stop in that moment. It shattered. The stunned silence that had fallen over our 300 guests was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket of disbelief. I stood there on that small, candlelit stage, my arm still linked through Richard's, my painted-on smile frozen on my face. It was a rictus of horror. My mind, in an act of self-preservation, simply refused to process what was happening. It was as if I were watching a scene from a strange, surreal, and incredibly cruel movie. I remember the details with a hallucinatory clarity. The way Amber's red dress seemed to suck all the other color out of the room. The triumphant, proprietary way she squeezed Richard's hand. The flicker of movement in the crowd as our son, Michael, took a step forward, his face a mask of furious disbelief, only to be held back by his wife. The sound of a champagne flute shattering on the stone patio, a sharp, violent sound that broke the terrible silence. Richard seemed oblivious to the shockwave he had just sent through the room. Or maybe he was reveling in it. He was a man who had always loved a grand gesture, and this, it seemed, was to be his grandest. He was not just ending a marriage, he was launching a new brand, a new identity. Richard Collins, ageless titan of industry, with his beautiful, youthful accessory. He finally looked at me then, and there was no apology in his eyes. no shame. There was only a kind of cold, impatient finality. It was the look of a man who has just closed a chapter and is eager to start the next. He gently, but firmly, unlinked his arm from mine, severing the physical connection that had been a constant in my life for over half a century. The spot on my arm where his had been felt instantly, icily cold. I don't remember walking off that stage. I don't remember how I got from the center of that terrible public spectacle to the quiet sanctuary of my bedroom. I think my daughter Sarah must have guided me. I have a vague, dreamlike memory of her hand on my back, of her whispering, "Mom, let's go upstairs. Let's get you away from this." I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed I had shared with Richard for 50 years, still in my beautiful silver gown. The sounds of the party below, the confused murmuring of the guests, the band starting to play a soft, uncertain tune, were a distant, muffled roar. My children, Michael and Sarah, stood before me, their faces a mixture of rage, pity, and a helpless, bewildered love. "Mom, I am so sorry," Sarah said, her voice choked with tears. "I had no idea. He's lost his mind. This is insane." "I'm going to kill him," Michael said, his voice a low, furious growl. "I'm going to go down there, and I am going to tear him limb from limb." I just looked at them, my children, my beautiful grown-up children, and I couldn't speak. The shock was a thick, paralyzing gel, encasing my mind, my body, my voice. I was a statue in a silver dress. The party died a quick, awkward death. Guests, our friends for decades, fled into the night, their faces a mixture of horror and pity. That pity was the part that cut the deepest. I had been the woman they all envied, the woman with the perfect life. And now, in the space of a single 5-minute speech, I had become an object of their deepest, most profound pity. The tragic Mrs. Collins, the poor discarded wife. Richard didn't come upstairs that night. I didn't expect him to. Around 3 a.m, I heard the sound of his flashy sports car starting up, its engine a vulgar roar in the quiet of the night. And then he was gone. He had driven off into his new future, with his new partner, leaving me behind in the wreckage of our past. The days that followed were a blur of shame and a strange, disorienting grief. It wasn't the clean grief you feel for a death. It was a messy, ugly, humiliating grief for a life that had been revealed as a lie. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't face the looks, the whispers, the pity of the town. My home, once my castle, had become my prison. My children were wonderful. They were my rocks. They rallied around me, their anger on my behalf a fierce, protective shield. They handled everything. They called the caterers, the band, the rental companies, and explained that the party was over. They fielded the endless, concerned phone calls from friends and family. But Richard, in his cold efficiency, had already moved on to the next phase of his plan. 2 days after the party, a courier arrived at the door. He delivered a thick, formal envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter. Not from Richard, of course. From his lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal brutality. It informed me that Richard was filing for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. It stated that he would be making a generous settlement offer, one that would allow me to maintain a comfortable, though appropriately adjusted, lifestyle. It then politely, but firmly, informed me that he would be returning to the house in 1 week to collect his personal belongings, and that he would be bringing Amber with him. Finally, it stated that the house, or house, would be put on the market immediately, as it was a shared asset that needed to be liquidated. I read the letter, and the shock finally began to recede, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He wasn't just leaving me. He was evicting me. He was dismantling my entire life with the cold, impersonal precision of a corporate takeover. My inner monologue was a frantic, terrified scramble. Sell the house? Where will I go? What will I do? For 50 years, my entire identity had been wrapped up in this house, in this life, in being Mrs. Richard Collins. I had no career of my own. I had no independent finances. I had been a painter, once, a long, long time ago. But I had given that up to be a wife, a mother, a hostess. I had poured all of my creative energy into building his world. And now, he was taking that world away. My son, Michael, who was a lawyer himself, was apoplectic when he read the letter. "This is an act of war, Mom," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "This isn't a divorce. It's an eviction. He's trying to intimidate you, to scare you into taking a lowball settlement. We are not going to let him get away with this. We are going to fight him. We will get you the best, most ruthless divorce lawyer in the state." And so began the war. The battle for the dissolution of a 50-year marriage. But it was a war I felt completely unequipped to fight. I was 76 years old. I had never balanced a checkbook in my life. I was up against a man who was a master of the game, a man who had built an empire on his ability to win, to conquer, to close the deal. The week leading up to his return was a slow-motion torture. I walked through the rooms of my home, a ghost at my own weight. Every object I looked at was a memory, a testament to a shared life I now had to reevaluate. The beautiful dining room table, where we had hosted 1,000 family dinners. The grand piano he had bought me for our 25th anniversary. Had any of it been real? Had the love been a lie all along? Was I just a business partner he had decided to liquidate? The day he was due to arrive, I was a wreck. My children insisted on being there, a silent, supportive guard of honor. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, his sports car, a screaming yellow monstrosity that I had always hated, pulled up the long, winding driveway. He got out of the driver's side. He looked younger. He was wearing tight designer jeans, a ridiculously youthful leather jacket, and sunglasses. He looked like a parody of a man trying to recapture his youth. And then, she got out of the passenger side. Amber. She was wearing a white tracksuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a high ponytail. She looked bright, shiny, and utterly, completely out of place in the elegant, old-world landscape of my home. She looked at the grand house, her eyes wide with a greedy, acquisitive glee. She was not just visiting. She was taking inventory. And I had to stand there, in my own foyer, with my 2 children flanking me, and watch as this man, this stranger, and his young, vapid replacement prepared to walk through my home and tag the pieces of my life they had decided were his. The humiliation was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of my throat. The battle had begun, and the first salvo was about to be fired in my own living room. Watching Richard and Amber walk into my home was one of the most profoundly violating experiences of my life. It was a hostile occupation. He walked in with the easy, arrogant stride of a conquering general, while she trailed beside him, her eyes wide, scanning every inch of the house with a look of undisguised, hungry appraisal. She wasn't just looking at a home. She was looking at a showroom, at the spoils of her victory. My children, Michael and Sarah, stood beside me, their bodies rigid with a furious, protective energy. Michael, a lawyer himself, stepped forward. "Dad," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You are here to collect your yacht personnel belongings, nothing else. We are here to make sure you stick to that." Richard didn't even flinch. He took off his sunglasses and looked at his son with a cool, dismissive air. "Michael, don't be so dramatic," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "This is all very civilized. I'm just here to pick up what's mine. Amber is here to help. She has a wonderful eye for design." The insult was so audacious, it was breathtaking. He was bringing his mistress into my home, the home I had designed and decorated, and praising her eye for design as she prepared to help him strip it of its assets. And so began the agonizing, room-by-room autopsy of my 50-year marriage. It wasn't a civilized process. It was a slow, meticulous, and deeply cruel campaign of psychological warfare orchestrated by him, with Amber as his gleeful second-in-command. At first, it was just the obvious things. His clothes from the walk-in closet, his collection of expensive watches, his golf clubs. But it quickly escalated. He began to lay claim to things that were not just his, but yours. We were in the study, a room lined with the books we had collected over a lifetime. It was my favorite room in the house. He walked over to the large, antique, mahogany desk, the desk where we had sat together for decades, paying bills, writing letters, planning our lives. "I'll be taking this, of course," he announced, running his hand over the polished wood. "Dad, you can't be serious," Sarah said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "You bought that for Mom for your 20th anniversary." Richard turned to her, a look of performative surprise on his face. "Did I? Gosh, I think you're right. But it was always more of a masculine piece, don't you think? It will look perfect in the new condo." He turned to Amber. "Want it, darling?" Amber, who had been running her fingers over the spines of my first edition novels, looked up and smiled, a bright, vapid, and utterly cruel smile. "Oh, absolutely, Ricky," she chirped, using a nickname that was like a cheese grater on my soul. "It's got, like, a total boss vibe. My friends will be so jealous." My inner monologue was a screaming, silent vortex. My desk. My anniversary present. He's giving it to her. To put in their new condo. This isn't happening. But it was. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, a ghost in my own study, and I watched as he slapped a small pre-printed sticker that said Collins onto the corner of my desk. He had come prepared with labels. The recurring hurtful details became a form of torture. He moved through the house, a king dispensing judgments, with Amber as his adoring courtier. Every object was subjected to their joint appraisal, and their verdicts were always designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain. The beautiful landscape painting that hung over the fireplace, a painting I had bought at a small local art fair 30 years ago, because it reminded me of the place we had gone on our honeymoon? "I'll take this," he declared. "Why, Dad?" Michael challenged. "You always said you hated that painting." "Amber loves it," he said simply, as if that were the only opinion that mattered. And another, Collins sticker was affixed. The collection of silver-framed family photographs on the grand piano. The photos of our children growing up, of our family vacations. Amber picked one up, a picture of me and Richard holding a baby Michael. She looked at the young, happy woman in the photo, me, and then she looked at the old, broken woman standing in the room. And she smiled, a small, pitying, triumphant smile, before placing it back down. "You can keep those, I guess," she said to me, her voice dripping with a false, magnanimous sweetness. "We'll want to take new ones for the new house." The sentence rhythm of my life became a series of brutal, staccato blows. My desk. His. My painting. His. When? My piano. His. He was not just taking things. He was taking my history. He was rewriting our shared past, inserting her into the narrative and erasing me from it, piece by painful piece. The most cutting dialogues were reserved for the things I had made myself. I was a painter. The house was filled with my art, canvases I had poured my heart and soul into over the years. We entered the sunroom, the room that had been my studio, the room where I was speaking from now. It was filled with my paintings, my easel, the familiar, comforting smell of turpentine and oil paints. Amber wrinkled her nose. "Gosh, it really stinks in here, doesn't it?" she said, wafting a hand in front of her face. Richard chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Eleanor's little hobby," he said, gesturing to the canvases that lined the walls. Amber walked over to one of my favorite pieces, a large, vibrant abstract I had painted a few years ago, a piece that had been a finalist in a prestigious local art competition. She tilted her head, her expression the one a person might use to look at a strange, unidentifiable bug. "It's interesting," she said, the word hanging in the air like an insult. It's not really my style. I'm more into, like, minimalist, black and white photography. It's very chic right now." "Wayne, down." Richard, my husband of 50 years, the man who had once told me my art was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, the man who had encouraged me, who had praised me, who had claimed to be my biggest fan, just nodded in agreement. "Yes, darling," he said. "You're right. It is a bit cluttered, a bit old-fashioned. He turned to me then, his face a mask of false sympathy. Eleanor, I don't think any of this will really fit in with the new aesthetic. You can keep all of it, of course. My gift to you. His gift to me. He was gifting me my own work, my own soul, after his 28-year-old girlfriend had just declared it to be tacky and out of style. The humiliation was so profound, it was a physical sensation. It was a wave of heat, a tightness in my chest. I felt like I was suffocating. I looked at my children. I saw the helpless rage in their eyes. They were trying to fight for me, but they were outmatched. Richard wasn't just their father. He was a legal and financial titan. He was using his power, his wealth, his complete and utter lack of shame, as a blunt instrument to beat us all into submission. The day ended with a final, devastating act of cruelty. We were in the master bedroom. His team of movers were carefully packing his suits and his shoes into boxes. He walked over to my side of the bed, to my nightstand. On it sat a small, simple, silver music box. It was the first gift he had ever given me, for our first Christmas together, when we had nothing but a tiny apartment and our love for each other. It played, "Our Love Is Here to Stay." It was the most precious thing I owned. He picked it up. "Dad, no," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "You can't. That's Mom's." He turned it over in his hands. He opened the lid, and the tinny, familiar melody tinkled in the silent, tense room. "I remember this," he said, a look of faint, nostalgic surprise on his face. He closed the lid. "You know," he said, looking at Amber, "this would look lovely on your dresser, darling. A little piece of history." And he dropped it into one of his boxes. He was not just taking my desk, my art, my history. He was taking my sentiment. He was stealing the very memory of our love, of the young, hopeful boy he used to be, and he was giving it to her. It was the ultimate act of desecration. And in that moment, watching him, watching the smug, triumphant smile on her face, something inside me, something that had been dormant for 50 years, began to stir. The shock, the grief, the humiliation, they were still there. But beneath them, a new feeling was starting to form. A feeling that was cold and hard and sharp as a shard of glass. It was the feeling of a woman who had finally had enough. The day Richard and Amber left, taking with them the physical artifacts of my 50-year marriage, the house fell into a profound and unsettling silence. It was no longer the comfortable, familiar silence of a home at rest. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a tomb. There were gaping holes on the walls where paintings had once hung, empty spaces on the floor where furniture had once stood. It was a house full of ghosts, of amputated memories. My children stayed with me for a few days, their presence a warm but ultimately inadequate bandage on a gaping wound. They were full of righteous fury, of plans for legal battles, of promises to make him pay. I listened to them, but my own mind was somewhere else. I was in a state of deep, internal shock, a place beyond tears, beyond rage. I was a battlefield, and a slow, quiet, and profound transformation was taking place within me. The woman who had been the gracious hostess, the supportive wife, the quiet diplomat, she was gone. She had died in the living room, watching him put a sticker on her painting. The woman who had believed in the sanctity of shared memories died in the bedroom, watching him drop her music box into his box. The person who was left was a stranger to me. She was quiet, she was watchful, and she was beginning to think in a way she never had before. She was beginning to think like him. The legal battle that followed was exactly the brutal, one-sided affair my son had predicted. Richard's lawyer was a shark, a man known for his scorched earth tactics. He sent a blizzard of paperwork, of motions, of demands for discovery. He was trying to bury us, to exhaust us, to bleed us dry financially and emotionally before we even got to court. Richard's settlement offer was, as he had promised, generous by his own cruel definition. He would allow me to keep my car. He would give me a portion of our liquid savings, enough to live on for a few years perhaps. And the house, our beautiful sprawling estate, which was valued in the millions, was to be sold, with the proceeds split exactly 50-50. It's an insult, my own lawyer, a good but perhaps outmatched man, told me. 50 years of marriage, of non-financial contribution to his career and the building of his empire. You are entitled to far more. But he's going to make us fight for every single penny. And so we fought. Or rather, they fought. I sat in depositions, a silent gray-haired ghost, and I listened as Richard's lawyer painted a picture of me as a kept woman, a woman who had enjoyed a life of immense luxury without contributing a single dollar to it. They portrayed my 50 years as a wife and mother, not as a partnership, but as a long, expensive, and ultimately terminated employment contract. The most cutting dialogues took place in those sterile, wood-paneled conference rooms. Richard was there, of course, looking tanned and vital, with Amber often waiting for him in the hallway, a visible, smiling reminder of what he had traded me for. He would speak about our life together in a cold, detached, financial language that made my skin crawl. The property on Elm Street was an investment, he would say, referring to our family home. The European vacations were a business expense, for networking. The parties were a marketing tool. He was systematically stripping our life of all its love, all its sentiment, and reducing it to a series of business transactions. And the final, most brutal calculation was his assessment of me. Eleanor had a wonderful life, he said in one deposition, looking not at me, but at his lawyer. She had a beautiful home, a staff to help her, a limitless credit card. She pursued her hobbies without any financial pressure. I gave her a 50-year vacation. And now, she feels entitled to half of what Gil built. It's a classic case of spousal entitlement. A spousal entitlement. He had taken my 50 years of love, of raising his children, of creating a home, of being his partner in every sense of the word, and he had given it a label that made me sound like a greedy, lazy parasite. The final straw, the thing that finally broke through my shock and galvanized the cold, hard resolve that had been forming in my soul, was not an insult. It was a business proposal. About 6 months into this legal war of attrition, my lawyer called me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with a weary resignation. "We've received a new offer from Richard's team. It's unorthodox. He explained it to me. Richard was tired of the legal fees. He wanted to end it. So, he was offering a final, take-it-or-leave-it settlement. He would give me the house. Outright. Free and clear. A multi-million-dollar estate. In exchange, I would have to walk away from everything else. All the stocks, all the other properties, all the liquid assets. All of it. It's a powerful move, Eleanor, my lawyer said. He knows how much you love the house. He's betting that you are so sentimental, so attached to your home, that you will take the deal, even though it means walking away from a fortune that is rightfully yours. He's trying to buy you off with your own memories. Saying. And in that moment, listening to my lawyer, something clicked. The new woman who had been slowly, quietly forming inside me, finally stepped forward and took control. The sentimental, heartbroken Eleanor was gone. In her place was a clear-eyed strategist. I looked around my beautiful, empty house. The house I had loved, the house that had been my cage. And I finally saw it for what it was. An asset. A very valuable asset. But it was also a liability. It was expensive to maintain. It was full of painful memories. And he was using my love for it as a weapon against me. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and clear as a winter morning, what I had to do. I had to stop thinking like the woman he had married and start thinking like him. Tell him I accept his offer, I said to my lawyer. My lawyer was shocked. He argued with me, told me I was making a huge mistake, that I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment. No, I said, my voice calm and firm. My judgment has never been clearer. Accept the offer. Draw up the papers. I want the house. The divorce was finalized a month later. Richard was smug, triumphant. He had successfully protected the bulk of his liquid fortune. He had bought off his sentimental old wife with a big, empty, expensive house that he probably assumed I couldn't even afford to maintain. He and Amber flew off to the Caribbean to celebrate their freedom. He thought he had won. He thought the story was over. He had no idea that I was about to write a brand new chapter. A chapter that he, in his arrogance, had never seen coming. He had given me the house. He had given me the battlefield. And now, I was going to turn his greatest weapon into my own. The day the divorce was finalized was the day my new life began. While Richard and Amber were sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere, celebrating his brilliant victory, I was not weeping among my empty rooms. I was in my sunroom, my old studio, and for the first time in 30 years, I was preparing a new canvas. The profound, soul-crushing humiliation had finally burned away, leaving behind a core of something I hadn't felt since I was a young woman, before I became Mrs. Richard Collins. Ambition. My awakening was not a sudden, dramatic epiphany. It was a quiet, cold, and calculated strategic decision, the kind Richard himself would have admired. He had played a brilliant game of chess, sacrificing his queen, the house, to protect his king, his liquid fortune. He thought he had left me with a beautiful, useless, and expensive liability. He had mistaken my love for my home as a sentimental weakness. He had no idea that my love was about to be transformed into a formidable business plan. My fight back was not a shouted declaration of war. It was a series of quiet, deliberate phone calls and meetings, conducted with a calm, focused precision that would have made my ex-husband proud. My first act was to turn my pain into a product. For 50 years, I had poured my creative soul into my paintings, the little hobby that Amber had found so distasteful. I looked at the canvases that filled my studio, the ones Richard had so generously gifted me. They were not just paintings. They were a 50-year visual diary of a life, of a marriage, of a family. They were the soft, impressionistic paintings of my children as babies, the vibrant, colorful landscapes from our family vacations. And then there were the newer ones, the ones I had painted in the last few years of our marriage, darker, more abstract, filled with a tension and a sadness that I hadn't even consciously understood at the time. They were the story of a lie. I called the most prestigious, most avant-garde art gallery in the city. I used the Collins name, a name that still opened doors, to get an appointment with the owner, a formidable woman named Isabella Dott. I invited her to my home. She walked through my studio, her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanning each canvas. She didn't say a word. I didn't offer any explanation. I just let the work speak for itself. Finally, after a long, tense silence, she turned to me. "This is a remarkable body of work, Mrs. Collins," she said, her voice devoid of pity or sentiment. "There's a story here, a 50-year story. It's raw, it's powerful, and it's incredibly marketable." She proposed a solo exhibition, a massive, career-launching show. But she had one condition. "We can't sell it as Eleanor Collins, A Life in Painting," she said. "That's boring. We need a narrative. We need a hook." She looked at me, her eyes gleaming. "We'll call it The Golden Cage, 50 Years of a Perfect Marriage." And so, my humiliation became my brand. The story of my public, spectacular divorce became the backdrop for my art. The paintings of my happy children were now tinged with a dark irony. The abstract expressions of my later years were now seen as a premonition of the coming storm. It was a brilliant, savage, and deeply commercial idea. And I agreed without a moment's hesitation. My second act was to transform the battlefield itself. The house. My beautiful, empty prison. It was too big, too full of ghosts, too expensive to maintain. But it was also a magnificent piece of real estate in the most exclusive part of town. I didn't sell it. Selling it was what he expected me to do. Instead, I subdivided. I hired the best architects and contractors in the city. I took the sprawling 10-acre estate, and I carved it up. The main house, my beautiful, beloved home, I kept for myself. But the rolling back lawn? It became the site for 3 new, ultra-modern, and incredibly luxurious smaller homes, each with its own private garden and swimming pool. The old guest wing of the main house? It was converted into a state-of-the-art artist's studio and gallery space, which I would rent out to up-and-coming artists. I was no longer just a painter. I had become a real estate developer. I was using his own game, his own language of assets and investments, and I was playing it better than he ever had. The art exhibition was a staggering success. The story, the scandal, the raw, emotional power of the paintings. It was a combination the art world couldn't resist. The show sold out on the opening night. I became, overnight, one of the most talked about artists in the country. And not incidentally, I became a very, very wealthy woman in my own right. The money from the art, combined with the projected income from the new real estate development, meant that I was no longer just financially secure. I was building my own empire on the ashes of his. And then, about a year after our divorce, the news I had been quietly, calmly, and almost indifferently expecting finally arrived. A friend called me, her voice a mixture of shock and delicious gossip. Richard and Amber had split up. It was a cliché, a tale as old as time. The sun-kissed, 28-year-old personal trainer had not, it turned out, been in love with the 77-year-old man. She had been in love with his money. And Richard, in his desperate, pathetic attempt to keep her, to prove his youth and vitality, had spent it with a reckless, frantic abandon. The lavish trips, the expensive cars, the jewelry, the disastrous business ventures he had started to impress her. He had burned through his fortune with a speed that was breathtaking. And when the money ran out, so did she. She left him for a Russian oligarch, taking with her a final parting gift of his last remaining sports car and a bank account he had foolishly put in her name. He was ruined, penniless. A 78-year-old man with a bad dye job, a mountain of debt, and a portfolio of failed, trendy businesses. The Golden Titan had turned to rust. And that's when he came back. He showed up on my doorstep one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Not in a flashy sports car, but in a taxi. He looked old. For the first time, he looked his age. He was stooped, his face was gray, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been replaced by a watery, desperate plea. He told me everything. He confessed. He wept. He begged. He told me he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. He told me he had been a fool, temporarily insane, bewitched by a succubus. He told me that I was, and had always been, the only love of his life. I listened. I let him say it all. I looked at this broken, pathetic creature, this man who had publicly humiliated me, who had systematically dismantled my life, who had called my 50 years of love a spousal entitlement. And I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no love, just a kind of calm, detached emptiness. "I have nothing, Eleanor," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "I have nowhere to go. Please, can you find it in your heart to forgive me? Can I come home?" And in that moment, a new idea, a final, perfect, and beautifully ironic idea, began to form in my mind. An idea that was so audacious, so outrageous, it made me smile. A real smile, for the first time in a long time. "Yes, Richard," I said softly. "You can come home. I have an opening." A look of profound, tearful relief washed over his face. He thought he had won again. He thought the old, soft, forgiving Eleanor was back. "But," I continued, my voice still gentle, "things are a little different now. I have a very busy life. I have my art career, my real estate business. I have a large house to maintain. It's a lot for one woman to handle. I need help." I let the word hang in the air between us. "I need a driver," I said. "I need a gardener. I need someone to polish the silver, to serve the drinks at my parties, to clean the floors. I need, in short, a maid." I looked him directly in the eye, and I let my smile widen. The position comes with a small room, in the old staff quarters, of course. And modest salary? Are you interested in the job? The consequences of that offer were the beginning of my true resolution. The look on his face, the slow, horrifying dawning of understanding, of the sheer, magnificent, and utterly inescapable trap I had just laid for him. That was the first dividend payment on my new life. He was penniless. He was homeless. He was 78 years old. His children, who now saw him for the monster he was, would not take him in. He had no other choice. He took the job. And so, my ex-husband, the great Richard Collins, the man who had gifted me my own art and called me a parasite, came back to his old home, not as its master, but as its servant. He now lives in a small, sparse room in the basement, the room that used to belong to our old housekeeper. He wears a simple gray uniform that I had tailored for him. His days are filled with the tasks he once paid others to do. He mows the vast lawns he was once so proud of. He washes the expensive cars he no longer owns. He polishes the silver he once used to toast his own success. And once a week, on his hands and knees, he scrubs the gleaming hardwood floors of my studio, the studio filled with the old-fashioned art that has made me a millionaire. Sometimes, when I am hosting a party, a real party, filled with artists and writers and interesting people from my new life, I will ask him to serve the drinks. And our old friends, the ones who witnessed my public humiliation, will look at him, in his gray uniform, with a look of stunned, silent, and deeply satisfying comprehension. And what did I find in this strange new arrangement? Not happiness exactly. Happiness is a word for young people. I found something better. I found a profound, unshakable, and deeply peaceful sense of justice. I found the quiet, magnificent joy of a life reclaimed. I have my art. I have my business. I have my home, which is truly my own for the first time. I have my children's respect, a respect that is deeper and more real than it ever was before. The greatest lesson I learned is that a gilded cage is still a cage. For 50 years, I lived a beautiful, luxurious life, but I was not my own person. I was an extension of him. His betrayal, as cruel and as devastating as it was the key that finally opened the door. He didn't just leave me, he set me free. And he gave me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover the strong, ruthless, and brilliantly creative woman I had been all along. So now, I talk to you. To anyone out there who has ever felt trapped, or taken for granted, or defined by someone else's success. Do not ever be afraid to tear down the beautiful life you have built if you discover that it is a prison. Your own strength, your own talent, your own soul. That is the only real estate that you will ever truly own. And it is the one investment that will always, always pay dividends. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for letting me share my story of a second act I never knew was possible. If this story has inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. In the comments below, I would love for you to share one dream you had for yourself when you were young, a dream you might be able to revisit now. Love you all. This is Grandma Eleanor, and I'll see you in the next story.